Firstly, what do we make of this? Do you both have wills? Dom, do you have a will?
Well, I do have. My mum died last year, and I was the executor.
Okay. Did you know you were the executor?
I did know I was the executor. I didn't realise what being an executor entailed, and it was just a total nightmare because there's so much to sort out. Probate, all that kind of stuff takes so long, and also you're just dealing with all. They're not watching because they're living abroad. My siblings, who are all like, "What on earth's going on?" And you go, "Look, there's nothing I can do about it." If there hadn't been a will, in the end, I had to send them the will and say, "Look, this is what's happening. It's not my choice. This is what is happening."
So it was a contentious
one. No, it wasn't a contentious one. It really wasn't, actually.
So even when it's not contentious, your mum's written it all out. She's got it all sorted for you. Even then,
she was pretty clear on that. But even on that, they're saying, "Well, yeah, but when did she write this? You know, did she?"
Your siblings questioning it?
Yeah, I'm not going to... No, not too badly. It was fine. It was all right. But it made me realise that I wrote my will, I don't know, 12 years ago, and I suddenly thought... And at the time... I think we were like, we'll leave 5% of nothing of leave to these people, and then suddenly think I don't like those people anymore. They're gone and stuff. So you got to not only do you have to write a will, but you need to keep it updated.
It's quite an expensive task. Yeah, to constantly get it updated.
It's not constant. Yeah, not constantly. But I'm just saying, if your life situation changes, don't forget that you may be left everything to your Labrador or something like that. So, you know, I mean, I have left everything to my Labrador.
I made mine when I was getting divorced, and I thought, if I get knocked down by a bus tomorrow, he gets everything.
Yeah.
So I got one done really quickly. And I just made it really simple. You know, just everything that I got gets divided in the children. Obviously, that amount has dwindled over the years, but it's still percentage-wise. But it was expensive, but it was literally just this...
What, getting the will was expensive?
Yeah, having a solicitor do it was expensive.
It's expensive relatively, but I'm telling you, if you don't have a will and someone dies without a will, the expense of that is unbelievable. So.
Wow. Okay. I'm sitting here really...
Have you got one?
I have never written a will. I don't have
I didn't want to, because it makes you feel mortal, doesn't it?
But and maybe we need to talk about death more, and maybe we need to talk about our wills with our loved ones so that your siblings don't question it.
But you've got kids, right?
Well, yeah.
You 100% should have a will. I mean, yeah.
I'm starting to think maybe this is something I have just...
It's really easy. There are will kits. You can do them yourself. If it's really simple...
Except for my sister, who's a lawyer, says that every year at the kind of Law Society dinner, they do a toast to DIY wills because it earns them an awful lot of money.
Really?
Why? Because they do it wrong.
Oh, really? Okay.
They can be challenged.
I'm going to speak to somebody now who might be able to answer some of those questions for us. We've heard from the panel. What do you think? What issues have you had? 0207 862 2222. Maybe your problems can enlighten all of us, so do let us know. We're joined now by Trusha Velji, Director and Chief Solicitor of Touch Solicitors, who work with Will Aid, a charity that promotes the will writing and helps people get access to lawyers for charities, which is amazing. So you can get a will for pretty cheap then, Trusha. You don't have to be spending the thousands of pounds that I would have assumed you had to spend.
Absolutely. I think there's different types of wills. The cost can vary across the region against, different firms of solicitors, different will writers. So the price can vary quite considerably across the entire UK. I wouldn't necessarily say just having a free will or a cheaper will is going to be the best option for you. Your circumstances might be completely different, which will dictate the cost of having something which might be quite considerably more priced.
As a solicitor, you must have dealt with some really tricky situations of people not having left a will. Can you remember any specifically?
Oh, we've had so many situations. We're currently dealing with an 83-year-old gentleman who is not in a marriage, but in a partnership for 50 years. He's now being forced out of his home, and at the age of 83, looking for a different home is ideally not what he wants to be doing. So had his partner have made a will leaving provision for him, he wouldn't be in this position at this stage.
So it's really safety and protection for your loved ones after you go. Just talking about elderly parents, I heard a story, and I'm just wondering what you would say to this, of an elderly parent who has married well in a care home with dementia. When you get remarried, does it make the will that you have already written nil and void, i.e. will her children get access to nothing? Will it all be passed on to her new toy boy?
Okay, so obviously there's quite a few issues there. So if somebody is in a care home, it may be that they could still go back and revisit their will. If they haven't revisited their will and they have subsequently got remarried, then yes, the current law says that a marriage will revoke it. There is ongoing debate about changing the law on that to make sure that that doesn't happen anymore. But like I said, it's an ongoing debate. So currently, the law says that a remarriage will revoke an existing will.
So you really
so there is potential that the new partner would inherit, yes.
So you really do have to keep updating the will every time there is a life change, a new child is born, or somebody gets divorced, or somebody gets remarried, just to make sure that everything's legally intact. Let's say that you do that and you're very diligent about it. When you pass, can your will ever be contested then?
I think it's a good idea to review your will every 2 to 3 years. Or, as you said, when your circumstances change, whether you're buying a house, whether you've had children, those are the key times that you're going to want to change your will. And I think as you're getting older, the chance of being contested, again, there's two elements of contesting a will. Commonly, people aren't actually contesting a will. They're asking for provision to be made for them. And that is clearly different between the two. If you're contesting a will, you're saying that the actual will instrument isn't valid, either because it's not been drawn up correctly, or the person who did the will didn't have the necessary capacity to make the will, or they were pressurized into doing it. So those are the key reasons to contest a will. But it could be that if you've been left out, you're not actually contesting the will, you're asking for provision to be made for you. So there is a complete different application that you would need to go down.
Can I ask a question? If you're unmarried, let's say, and you've got children and you die and you haven't made a will, would it just be up to the executors to decide how your estate is distributed? And does the government take a bigger slice if you haven't got a will?
Okay. So if you're unmarried, then the rules of intestacy would apply if you haven't made a will. So in that instance, they're not called executors, they're called administrators. And the people that are the administrators are the same set of people who would inherit from your will. For example, if you've got a spouse, they would be first entitled, and then it would flow down to your children. Does it mean that the government take a big chunk out of your estate? It depends, again, on your financial circumstances. If you have a tax liable estate, then regardless of having a will, you may still be liable to inheritance tax. But the whole idea of making a will is that you're going to pass it down to the people that you want it to go to, and not have this position of limbo. Is it going to go to them? Is it not going to go to them?
Tricia, we have so many questions to ask you, but we're also getting so many calls, so I'd rather answer the viewers' calls first, so bear with us. Rachel from Wolverhampton, do you have a question for us, for Tricia, or do you have a story to tell us?
It's a story, really, just of how important the will is. I lost my brother to suicide in August 2020. Unfortunately, he didn't have a will. So he'd been separated from his wife for 20 years, but because they were still legally married, his whole estate passed to her. At the time, we got the devastation of losing my brother. And on top of that, we'd also got the complication of my sister-in-law stepping in and taking the estate and organising the funeral, which, whilst we were very good friends with her still, that's not what my brother wanted.
And how did you know what your brother had wanted?
Well, my brother wanted and left a note saying that he wanted his estate to pass to me, but because it wasn't signed and dated, it wasn't legally binding. And I just felt that, having looked after him for the last couple of years of his illness, when I actually lost him, I was on the outside looking in, because I had no control over what happened next.
Rachel, I'm so sorry for your loss, but thank you for calling to share that story, because actually it's a well warning that actually just writing something, you have to be careful with these DIY wills, because...
I wasn't promoting that.
No, I know, but and I'm sure the DIY kits are much more professional than just writing it down on a bit of paper, but I would have assumed, had I written something down on a paper, that would have been my last will and testament, and that would have been, it would have been upholded by my loved ones and family. So that's not the case. So we have to go through a solicitor to get these sorts of things done, Tricia?
I mean, I'm not particularly a promoter for DIY wills for obvious reasons. And I think the key thing about will writing is it can be straightforward. And even with the DIY kits that you get in shops, you know, it does say read the small print, read, you know, what you're writing down, and make sure that you follow the instructions that are given. So having your instructions written down is always a good idea. You don't always have to use a professional, but I think the key thing about, you know, in the circumstances of Rachel, obviously, I'm sorry to hear about the loss of your brother. And the key thing is, if things are expressed during the lifetime, that is really important to make sure that that is documented in the will. So it's always a good idea to have a professionally drawn up will for obvious reasons. That you have different circumstances to Joe Bloggs down the street, for example.
And something written in a piece of paper doesn't really stand up in law. Rachel, thank you for sharing that. Joanne from Nottinghamshire, what's your story or question?
It's a story. My mother made a will some years ago. She had married later on in life, and her husband at the time both made a will. I was executor of that will. She told me where it was kept and what solicitor they had made the will with. However, later on in life, she developed dementia, and her husband at the time decided to take her out of Nottinghamshire, where she'd lived all her life, up to Yorkshire. She was very upset. She didn't want to go. And unbeknownst to me, they gave power of attorney to her husband's son, who we didn't particularly know very well, vaguely, but she'd never sort of known much about him. Her husband then died, and the son, who had the power of attorney, put my mum in a care home without letting me know where it was. I wasn't allowed to contact her unless it was through him, because I'd had a disagreement with my mum's husband before he died. She did die last year. She did survive quite a few years, and I couldn't find. Obviously, they'd had all the possessions, so the will had somewhere disappeared. I contacted the solicitor where she said she'd made the will, and they couldn't find a copy. So this guy that had the power of attorney, like I say, kept me since when COVID broke out. I didn't hear anything or see. I wasn't allowed to even go to Yorkshire and see my mum. All her possessions had gone when she died last year, and I asked. They said they'd send possessions, which they did, which consisted of a few tops and a couple of pairs of shoes and a few photographs, and that was it. And my mum had made provision in this will because she'd given her husband at the time quite a lot of money, which had come from my granddad. So that money was supposed to come to me before the rest of the estate was shared out between me and the other stepchildren, if you like, stepbrothers. But he'd taken a lot. The guy that had the power of attorney had taken everything.
There sounds like there was quite a lot of steps there where something could have happened. I mean, first of all, surely you are not allowed to take someone you're not allowed to give power of attorney over to somebody while you have dementia. Surely you have to do that prior to getting dementia. Would that be right, Tricia? I'm not sure.
Yeah, so when you're assessing capacity, I think it's just because somebody's got dementia, it does not mean that they don't have mental capacity to do a legal document such as a power of attorney or a will. So it's always decision specific. You've got to look at that individual circumstances. Do they understand what's going on around them? Can they set up a power of attorney? If it transpires later on, as perhaps it could have done, that person may not have had the capacity to make a power of attorney, there is the Office of Public Guardian who will investigate into these circumstances, and there is potential that power of attorney can be revoked. So it is always a good idea, if you feel that a person hasn't got capacity to do a document, that you do ask the courts to look into it for you.
Okay, well, I mean, that might be too late for you now, Joanne, but anybody else out there that's in that situation, there are other avenues you can take, and make sure you get there before you end up in a situation like Joanne's. Thank you very much for your call. Stephen from Dorset, when it comes to wills, what's your thoughts?
Good afternoon. Well, similar to Don Joly, really. My wife, we had mirror wills. Sadly, she died 5 years ago, and it took 10 months to sort that out. Now, my cousin who died years before my wife, he had no will, and that was sorted out in half the time my wife's was. And I had to go to another solicitor and swear on a Bible that I was telling the truth. It was a complete nightmare.
Well, the swearing on a Bible seems quite old-fashioned, Stephen. That seems very odd. But the fact that your cousin didn't make a will and it was all sorted out much quicker sounds unusual. Is that because your cousin had less assets than your wife, perhaps?
Well, I don't know. He left nearly £200,000.
Ooh.
That's quite a lot of money, isn't it?
Yeah, it's definitely not a small amount. Why would that be, Tricia? Why would it take longer to sort out a will that's there in black and white and than the assets of somebody who didn't write a will at all?
So, Stephen, obviously, it's not always a common scenario where somebody who's died without a will, is going to take considerably quicker. It depends on the circumstances. You've always got to look at the assets involved, how many accounts there are, what the process is. The other thing you've got to consider is when you go through a firm of solicitors, they're going to go through a process to make sure that, all the I's are dotted and the T's are ticked. So there is a process that they will go through. The other thing you've got to consider are the delays at the probate registry as well. So it could have been at the time that the application was actually done, there were substantially more delays that were going on, which perhaps obviously slowed the process down a little bit. The types of assets, so even though perhaps your cousin had £200,000, it could have been £200,000 in one account, whereas perhaps your wife, who sadly passed away, she had different accounts, perhaps in different, whether they were ISAs or pensions, and that's why there were further delays in that process. So everyone's circumstances are different. It doesn't mean that having made a will, that process is going to be lengthier or shorter.
And I suppose whether it's lengthier or shorter, the important thing is that the right assets are going to the right people, and you would have more control of that if you had made a will. But Stephen, I completely understand your concerns with that. Thank you for your call. Val from the West Midlands, what's your thoughts on wills?
Good morning. Yeah, absolutely wonderful idea in principle. But as the other callers highlighted, when things go wrong, even a will doesn't stand. My father passed away in 2013, and up until today, I'm one of the executors. We're still trying to sort out the estate, and we've spent virtually about £60,000 in solicitors' fees.
So, I mean, that's 11 years worth of legalese and stuff that's gone on. But can you give me like a one-sentence summary? What has been the issue? What's been the main issue involved?
My father left a will.
Yes.
It was all fine, done with solicitors, and he had left a share to my mum instead of leaving the whole estate to her to be passed on to her. Okay. And that was contested that he hadn't made sufficient provisions for her. I think there's a terminology for it, and I can't remember.
No, that's fine. That's all right. So there had to be some sort of recalibration of what your dad wanted.
Yeah, he made it quite clear. He stipulated, everybody will get an equal share, and he included my mother in it. But one of the siblings didn't accept that, so it's still pending now.
So contested wills will always take longer to settle. Tricia, is that right?
So it sounds to me like the application has not been necessarily contested, but something I said earlier was a provision has been asked to be made supplementary to what is already in the will. So what's happened in your situation, it has taken longer. It's going to be considerably more expensive because it is going through a court process because there is a challenge being made to that will. So the costs are going to escalate, and it is really important that if the application is going down that road, you manage your cost expectations and you always ask for a breakdown of how these costs are accumulating.
I suppose it would be much better if you had siblings or whoever was going to benefit from a will, if you could all get around a table and have an actual discussion about it, rather than getting lawyers involved, which takes time and costs money.
The person who's made the will, number one, needs to tell everybody beforehand,
That's true.
this is what I'm going to do, so everybody hears it, and then they can't say it isn't what he wanted or isn't what she wanted.
All I would say, and this is not my personal experience, but I know I've had a lot of people I know that have been going through executive stuff. People behave very strangely.
When it comes to wills. Where there's a will, there's a family at war.
Honestly, and people that, tend to really think they all get on, or maybe they don't talk so much. The moment the kind of rock has gone, the glue, a lot of weirdness happens.
I think just expect nothing, and then you would be happy with
anything at all. You know what? That is honestly the secret.
Francine from Devon, do you have a story about a will or any concerns?
Hello. Yes. I've had a will made for some time, and I recently. Thank you. I recently amended it and updated it. But when I spoke to my financial advisor, because I said, well, what's the connection between the solicitor and you, my financial advisor, who looks after my pension and that sort of thing? And he said, well, they'll let me know. I said, yeah, but supposing they don't? I said, how can I do something that will connect it so the advice and the knowledge is there? So he came up with something called a dying tidily log. And basically it lists who your financial advisors are, who all your legal advisors or whatever are, people to be contacted. And basically I did my own in the end. I did 8 pages, and it basically lists clubs or associations that need to be contacted, the charities with all the addresses 100%. That I'm leaving stuff to. I'm single, I'm not married, I've not got children, I have got sisters, etc.
Your relatives are
everything.
Yeah.
It's a little while to do it, but it's done now and it's in the folder and it's easy for the executors to do.
Francine, your relatives are so unbelievably lucky. I'm presuming you would be very much for that, just writing down a document with all the emergency contacts needed to be contacted in event of a death.
Definitely. So one of the key things that I encourage, especially when we're drafting wills for clients, is the solicitor doesn't necessarily, or the will writer doesn't necessarily need to know as such the specifics of what you've got, but gathering your documentation in one place and telling your executors where they are is the easiest way. Obviously, if you take that to another level and write your account numbers down or have some sort of log, it's going to make life so much easier for somebody to deal with your affairs after you've passed away. The other thing I'd probably add to that would be to say things like, digital assets. So we commonly forget about things like your Tesco club card, the points that you might have in, some of these loyalty memberships or online bank accounts, PayPal. Those are, again, things that we often forget about.
Yeah, I would have just thought that the companies would have found some sort of way to scrap them. That's amazing advice, Francine. Thank you so much for calling. Cyril from Kent, what's your...
It's depressing, dying tidily. I'd rather die
messily?
Untidily, outrageously, fabulously. I know, but it's just a bit depressing to be tidy.
You can die messily, but you need to make it tidy for
other people. You can die however you want. You just have to make sure that everyone else finds it easy. Cyril from Kent, what's your view on this one? If you get any stories of woe?
Yeah, good morning. Yeah, I've heard most of the programme, and a lot of it's been covered, especially this log, preparing a log, handwriting all the information about where the money is. If you've got joint accounts, putting it in writing. Unfortunately, we had several books on how to make a will, which my wife looked at and did her own thing. But unfortunately, as I predicted, unless you got it in the right sort of context, it'll just won't be valid when you go for probate. and it's caused quite a lot of problems. With the result, I lost my wife a few weeks ago, and we've been going down this road, and at the same time, one of my sons has been nagging me like mad to make my will. So I've been made my will, and again, you're talking about numbers and how much they cost. I will tell you that I went to a solicitor and told them that this is what I want in my will, this is what names of the people, these are my executors, and having gone in with that, the bill from that will was £200 plus £40 for going to the land registry to see that my house could be just in my name. And that was the total of the whole thing.
Well, I mean, that's probably affordable and something maybe...
That's money well spent.
That is money well spent.
Because you're going to be spending much more afterwards.
But also, just having to deal with all of this just a couple of weeks after your wife's died is just, that must be terribly hard.
My mum had exactly that. She was very organised and had a box, which she told me, and everything was in it. And that was just so invaluable. It was because there are things you just don't know about, you don't think about.
I need to I've got a lot to do, I've just discovered. Geraldine from Berkshire, what's your question or story when it comes to wills?
Oh, hi. When my husband and I first got married and we got our first house, my father insisted that I make a will. So I literally made the will myself, hand wrote it, then I typed it up. No solicitor involved. It was a mirror will, so I left everything to my husband. He left everything to me.
Did you sign it and date it?
We signed it and we dated it, and we had two witnesses who were our next door neighbours.
Great.
And we had two original copies. I signed it, Rob signed it, and our two neighbours signed it.
Great.
So
well, that sounds like you've ticked, you've done all the boxes.
Well, 5 years later, my husband died very suddenly from an aortic aneurysm. Within 6 weeks, everything was sorted out. The mortgage was paid off. Wow. The insurances all came through. I had absolutely no problems with that will whatsoever. It went very briefly through probate, but it was really, really quick. And I guess there are more delays with the probate office now than there were then. Yeah. But this was only, 1999. It's not that long ago. And it was so quick. But I did what somebody else had said. I had everything, all my insurance documents, all in folders, because my husband was useless with money and paperwork and stuff like that. So I had it all organised, thinking that I might die first. And, of course, it was all there for me. It was
and you knew where it all was?
Can I say one thing? Which is, of course, people used to have documents, but now stuff's online. It's a bit more tricky because you need the password to get into this.
Passwords are massive.
Then you leave usernames and passwords. Yeah. But Geraldine, what a lovely note to end this part on. You get the gold star. Thank you so much for your call. Thank you for all your calls on this. It's been really informative. And obviously a huge thank you to Trisha Velge there, who's given us all the answers to all our questions. We'll have to move on now. After